All right, how is it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking Founders, where we talk to founders about their companies, their visions for the future, and how the two collide. Today, I'm so excited to be talking to Elena Nadolinski, who is the founder of Beanstalk. How is it going? Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's going pretty well.
Good, good. I am glad. So to get it started, if you can just give the listeners a little bit of a background on yourself, and then we can dive into what you're working on.
Sure. So I used to be a software engineer. I used to work for Microsoft, a couple startups, and then Airbnb. And then I realized I wanted to start my own company. During that decision process, I was getting more and more involved with the Ethereum community, which, if you guys are familiar, is a cryptocurrency that has smart contracts. And when I decided to really dive into starting my own company in the space, I really looked at what are some of the things that we're missing in the space to make cryptocurrency actually available as a payment system. And one of the stark things that I observed was the lack of projects working on privacy. And so that's kind of what I'm working on. And I can dive into that a bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we dive in, let's get some definitions out of the way for people that may have no idea about cryptocurrency. So can you kind of dive into what is Ethereum, what makes Ethereum different from other cryptocurrencies, and then we can go a little deeper into the privacy aspect that you're working on?
Sure. I'll actually start with Bitcoin because I think that's the one that most people have actually heard of. I think there was a survey done. I think almost 80% of Americans actually at least heard of Bitcoin, which is a really impressive number. So Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, was started almost 10 years ago, or actually more than 10 years ago. And it really showed this proof of concept that you can actually have this borderless sovereign currency that does not belong to any government. At first it was kind of dismissed as a joke. And then, fast forward to today, we have huge companies like Facebook doing their own cryptocurrency, Libra. There are actually nations like China, they're trying to make their own digital currency based on this technology. So it definitely evolved from being a joke into being a much more serious thing. Ethereum was probably a blockchain that really brought attention to this space because it had the ability to make smart contracts. So smart contracts are a piece of code that can now run on this network. And what happened in 2017 is that a lot of people started making what's called ICOs, initial coin offerings, on top of Ethereum. For better or worse, it brought in a ton of capital into this space. So I'm sure you guys heard of maybe scams in the blockchain world, or the ludicrous amount of money that some of these companies are raising. And, it was, largely brought by the fact that it was now so easy to make these smart contracts to raise money from the public. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Yeah, it definitely does. It gives a little bit of the history too. One thing I want to add as a little bit of context, additional context, is that a lot of people, especially in 2017, use cryptocurrency and trade cryptocurrency as a way to make money and a speculation and things like that. But there are plenty of companies out there that are kind of working on more different use cases and practical use cases for cryptocurrency, trying to push it forward. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on different use cases for cryptocurrency, and also kind of diving into Beanstalk and how it fits in the whole equation.
Yeah. There's a misconception that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum are private. People usually think, Bitcoin was used for dark markets. Of course, it's like this anonymous cryptocurrency. But that's actually not the case. Bitcoin, Ethereum are probably the least private payment systems out there. And to steal a quote from Ian Myers, cryptocurrencies are like Twitter for your bank account. Every transaction you make on Ethereum, Bitcoin, and many others is basically broadcasted to the world in plain text. And if you ever give somebody your address, they can look it up online and basically see every transaction you've ever made. So it's literally like kind of publishing your bank statement permanently on the web. And if you think about let's just imagine for a moment that 50 years from now, people are actually using blockchain as their primary way of transacting. And it would be very difficult to imagine that world without privacy, right? Because even though, you might have nothing to hide, your financial privacy is actually extremely important for your security even. If someone knows exactly what coffee shop you go to every single morning, then they can extrapolate where you live or where they can find you on certain days of the week. So, privacy is not necessarily used for nefarious activities. We actually all have privacy already. And so my project is working on kind of bringing that same paradigm of expectations of what people can see about your financials into the crypto world as well. And so Beanstalk is actually not based on any existing blockchain. We're actually building our own standalone blockchain. And part of the reason is because privacy is actually a very difficult problem. You can't just kind of sprinkle privacy on top of existing solutions. And there are teams that actually are trying to kind of put privacy on top of Bitcoin, on top of Ethereum, and I can walk you through how that actually is not going to help in the long run. Privacy is also very hard from a usability perspective. We actually do have privacy coins out in the wild, but they're extremely hard to use and basically see no traction. So what we're working on is making privacy convenient, because otherwise people are not going to use it.
So you mentioned that you're not building on in the Ethereum blockchain or other blockchains, you're making your own. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how does someone make their own blockchain? What is involved with that? And what does that even mean? And what does that allow you to do once you have your own blockchain?
Yeah, good question. Anyone can make their own blockchain. What a blockchain node is, you run a program on your computer, let's say, and your computer connects to other computers in the world, and that's how you form a network. And then these nodes basically come to a consensus on certain statements. And those statements can be things like, this transaction actually did happen. And so then all nodes in the network agree on the fact that that transaction happened. And basically, to make it a bit more efficient, you want to batch those transactions in a block, and then provide something called proof of work. Basically, you're saying, I'm not just spamming the network. I can prove to you that I put in some work making this block. And that's basically how Bitcoin and other proof of work chains work. There are many other different consensus mechanisms, but basically the concept is that you have a bunch of nodes being connected and they reach to a consensus on whether or not a transaction happened. Yeah.
Got it. And something that I'm really interested in is blockchain is this technology that a lot of people talked about in 2017 on a hype realm, but now people are talking about, like, great, this exists. How do we use it to build business applications, to build practical applications? And it seems to me, at least what I hear from like A16Z and whoever puts out content on this, that there still hasn't been that wave of apps or products that use blockchain on a practical manner. Why do you think that is, and what do you think has to happen in order to bring blockchain into the mainstream, or even the early adopters? I feel like even the early adopters aren't using products on the blockchain yet because there aren't so many out there.
Yeah, no, you brought up a really excellent point. And to kind of build off more on top of that, so all kind of cryptocurrencies right now are actually over $200 billion market cap, but none of them have actually won yet. I can't go to the grocery store and buy anything with a Bitcoin. So to your point, even though there's so much money in the space, there isn't actually adoption, right? And I think I know what A16Z article you're referencing, but yeah, there isn't like a Netscape moment for blockchain type payments. And to answer your question of like, well, what is that kind of Netscape moment? I'm not sure, but we're basically trying everything. So what is like the actual pain point we're solving? And the one thing that like kind of drives me to building this project is we're seeing a lot of uncertainty in the world right now. There's a lot of drama, a lot of things happening in Hong Kong and China with authoritarian governments basically having full control over their citizens. There's Venezuela situation where the people's like worth and value are, is being dramatically devalued. I found this article this article is already outdated, but at the time it was written, a chicken was worth like 14 million bolivars because, the currency was just so highly inflated. And in Venezuela, it was actually legal for people to transfer their funds from bolivars to any other currency. So they were stuck. And, when you think about it, it seems extremely unfair that your worth, the fact that you have a full-time job, the fact that you're accruing this money, could be devalued just based on the type of government that you're under. And so maybe like the Netscape moment for blockchain technologies or blockchain payments is, people basically saying, look, it doesn't make sense for us anymore to have the fiat government-based fiat as our primary currency.
What are your thoughts on Libra as they first announced it, and as there's becoming a little bit of drama recently as some companies are kind of backing out of the project? What do you think about Libra and in the whole ecosystem, and will it matter in a century, or do you think it might just fizzle out because it's like private?
That is also an excellent question. So to give, a little bit more context for people, Libra is a Facebook project. It aims to be a cryptocurrency. It's not fully decentralized, so it's kind of like a hybrid cryptocurrency. A lot of people are actually questioning whether or not it is even a cryptocurrency, but and the way it works is that there are 100 validators, where a validator is a huge company like PayPal or Visa, and the Libra coin is backed by a reserve of currencies from different countries. So like the dollar, the euro, and so on. And when Facebook first announced Libra, there were a lot of different opinions in the crypto community. A lot of people thought of this as a very positive thing because now it's educating people that cryptocurrency is not something scary. It's, you can use Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp to, send people cryptocurrency. And so it's like a much more familiar sort of, transition from fiat to crypto. But I think now people are kind of viewing this in a different light. I think because Facebook is now unfavorable with the US government, it seems like everything they do is being highly questioned. And so I feel like they put this huge bullseye on crypto because now, Congress and the government is like very worried, like, wait a minute, companies, like anyone can just create their own currency. Like Facebook has, 3 billion users. They can, basically create their own currency and have, a huge monopoly over this thing. Actually, wait, I'm not sure how many users Facebook has, but quite a lot.
Yeah, it's up there for sure. It's in the billions.
Really? I don't know. I should probably look this up. I just made that statement.
No, it's all good. They definitely have it. I think across all of their products, I know they have at least 2 billion, and they might, if I remember correctly, they might with WhatsApp, with all of their products, they might have crossed 3, but I don't have it that. But don't quote me on that. It's just what I think. What I think I remember.
So that kind of, in a way, kind of backfired towards the crypto community.
So like, there are a lot of people out there, I would say, myself included, who, I'm entrepreneurial. I kind of know how this stuff works, and I'm just kind of this stuff as I'm like starting a company, an idea validation, and growing and raising money. And I think there's a lot of people that are just waiting for the right timing. A lot of times startups are about timing. And if you're too early, that's unfortunate. And if you're too late, it means you missed the boat. I'm curious, how do you think about timing for Beanstalk? And how do you suggest people think about timing for just blockchain in general when it's not proven yet, but the first killer app could be, just like Facebook, or at least MySpace was still a big company until Facebook, took it out.
Yeah, a lot of people in the space are asking the same question. For me personally, though, when I started this project, I talked to some investors and I asked around, And some investors immediately got it. And they were like, yes, this makes sense. We need privacy, because it's kind of ludicrous to think that we would have, a payment system with such huge transparency. You're not going to convince a business to have all their books out in the open. But then I talked to some people and they basically said it's too early for privacy. People don't care about privacy. Like, crypto is being used for speculation only. And, people don't really care about the fact that their, transactions could be out in the open, because maybe they're just using an exchange like Coinbase, right? So, they don't really care about that aspect at all. And so for me, it was like, okay, well, if I'm hearing this kind of, first of all, polarizing opinion on privacy, and the fact that it's too early for privacy, maybe it's actually the right time to start a privacy project, because by the time those investors change that opinion, it would already be too late, because there's market validation, quote unquote, because there's a company that has proven out that privacy does matter. But that's kind of a very risky approach, right? Because you could be completely wrong. And there have been, multiple companies that we've never heard of that, have just come up with a really great product, but at the wrong time. So yeah, it's definitely something I'm personally worried about.
So, kind of staying on Beanstalk for a second. So let's talk about just a early adopter, or like the earliest of adopters. How would someone, excuse my naivete, I really don't understand blockchain enough to like actually put the pieces together, but you're building a privacy blockchain, which like, let's say I wanted to build something on like Beanstalk. Is it how does someone engage with Beanstalk? And are you able to build products on top of it? Is it can you just kind of go a little deeper into the weeds on how someone can engage with Beanstalk?
Yeah. So privacy is really hard to do right. And I can go over exactly how our technology works. But because of that, we don't support smart contracts. So Ethereum, has this ability to do arbitrary programs. We actually don't have that. So we have payments only. So I'm able to transact and send you some funds, and you can send me some funds as well. We are thinking of doing kind of user-defined assets. So kind of how Ethereum, for example, had, if you are familiar with the history of 2017, Ethereum has a standard called ERC20, which is kind of a defined way of how you write a smart contract for your own asset. So I can make it like an Elena coin, or a Tron coin, or like whatever that is. So we're actually going to try and have that same functionality, but it'll be extremely limited. So you can only basically have the amount. So I can make my own coin, and the only kind of variable I'm able to tweak is how many of them are going to be initially minted. Which, if you look at how a lot of ERC20 smart contracts are written, that's basically the only functionality they have to. But it will be highly limited. The thing that we want to really focus on is how do you make private payments extremely convenient? So we're going to just double down the payments use case, because I still think the killer app for blockchain technologies is payments, and we haven't really even scratched the surface of what that means. So kind of like the early adopters are people that are going to really care about privacy, like they really understand that we are, kind of going to the world of our data being collected by, so many entities and so many companies, and there needs to be a push to kind of start changing your behavior to be more private, centric. And so we actually, there are many like apps that are kind of targeting that market, like tools that can, would obfuscate your browser activity, or, give you some more privacy on the web. I will probably try and like piggyback off of like that movement, and find those people that really care about privacy first.
That's awesome. I think it's a smart move, because I think many actually guests on the podcast over the last maybe 10 guests have said they think things are shifting back to privacy. It's Facebook, Google, Instagram have kind of opened up this like no privacy of your data, and now there's going to be a little bit of a reversion. I don't know if that's a word. People are going to revert back to wanting to have their data private. So I think your timing is impeccable. So what are some things that you kind of like spend your time thinking about when you're not working on Beanstalk, which I'm sure is all the time, because you're a founder. But I'm curious, are there industries or problems or startups or technologies out in the world that you spend some time thinking about that just interest you, even though you may not be working on them actively?
Yeah, so there actually is a product that, if I had 20 more hours a day, I would actually work on. And it's a better remote tool. So Beanstalk right now is 2 people. So there's me in San Francisco and my coworker is in Canada. So we're a remote team. And how do you make a remote team be as efficient, if not more efficient, than an in-person team? Like, that's the thing that I've been thinking about a lot, because there's actually a lot of advantages to working from home or like working from your own office space. Your commute is like 30 seconds. You have a lot of advantages. But traditionally remote teams have not, been as efficient as in-person ones. So that kind of got me thinking about, like, what are the tools that we have to facilitate remote work? And, there's tons of companies that are kind of in that space right now. But still, like, something isn't working. Like, you can think about the paradigm of like Slack. I think it's a very like a push kind of, or synchronous, I guess that some people would say, system where, I have a question and I message them and they immediately get this notification and they get distracted from whatever they were focusing on. Like, they might've been like in the zone, but now they have this notification they need to react to. And I actually think that those kind of push, like communication styles, are more disruptive towards your concentration and are actually worse. And what I discovered working remotely is that, a pull kind of or asynchronous communication model is a lot better, where you kind of like queue up your questions and you separate them by topics, and some of them might be urgent and maybe you'll ping that person, but some of them are not urgent. You just kind of want to get them out of your head. And there really hasn't been a good tool for that yet. Like, probably the best tool is email, but I hate email, so I never use it. So yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking about.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with all of that, especially some of the downsides of Slack. I'm curious, have you heard of this tool called Tandem?
Yeah, so actually a lot of people have been telling me to use it.
I mean,
And
it seems I think it's more asynchronous than Slack.
yeah, so I tried using Tandem and I personally didn't get it. Now, it might work for other people, but and maybe I tried their product really early. I haven't really been paying attention about some of the updates they were doing, but when I tried it, the biggest feature was basically, joining a room where you have audio and you can kind of hear the other person, and then they would have like some kind of like preset rooms, like the water cooler. So like in the real life, you might go to the kitchen and start talking to people. And so they have like this virtual like water cooler kind of room. And to me, that was like, okay, well, it's not really like, I can just like my coworker and I have actually had this where we just called each other and we don't necessarily have to talk. It's just that we have audio on, such that if we do have questions, I can ask the other person. And so to me, that feature wasn't really like useful. And I felt like it didn't actually solve the thing that was useful for me, which is like, how do you make this better pull model instead of the push model? So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that there seems to be tons of investors that are thinking about future of work, remote work,
Yeah.
freelancing, and I think it's kind of interesting because as someone who I've been in kind of the future of work freelance realm for about 3 years now, and I think for the first time I'm observing what like a hype cycle is because
Yep.
I mean, future of work, obviously we're all gonna be working in the future, so that's a sector, but there just seems to be so much money thrown at anything future of work. In reality, there are these unique problems that, like one that you just mentioned, which is asynchronous communication. And I don't know of a tool tackling that either. I'm kind of curious, what other, like, if you were an investor, let's say $100 million to deploy into work tools or just tools or in general, or even just startups, what else would you want to fund that you wish existed in your life that doesn't necessarily exist right now?
Do you mean like specifically for remote work, or?
I would let's go broad. I mean, it can be for remote work, it can be for work in general, but let's just pretend that I'm just going to make this up on the fly. You're an investor, congratulations. is the Brain Stock Fund, and you can just put money into things that you want to see grow and become a thing, or problems that you want to solve. I know I'm like putting you on the spot here a little bit, but like the number it just like got into my head. So I'm curious if you have some thoughts on where else would you want to see a product built, or what other even problems would you want solved in the world?
That's a good question. The first thing that came to mind, I'm not sure if I'm definitely being biased by the conversation that we just had about remote work, and I'm not sure if this is a good answer, and I haven't looked into if there is a solution for this, but we just we happen to be a remote first company because, we're two people and we're already remote. So everything we have is, online using, all these collaborative online tools. And so if we were to hire a third or fourth or fifth person, what I realized is that it's actually much easier to get high quality talent if you're not stuck with your geographical area. Especially in San Francisco, we're a startup, we have limited funding, and salaries for engineers here are astronomical. So you have to, compete with that. So, that's obviously a lot harder. And so what would be wonderful is if there was, and like once again, maybe this already exists, but kind of, this website or some sort of a service that gives you access to, more senior folks who, just don't want to live in San Francisco, because, living here is hard, and kind of have like this, a tool where you can find really high quality remote, engineers or workers to kind of start building your company out that way. That would be me.
It's almost like a marketplace for senior hires, because you'll find hungry people everywhere, but when you're looking for experience in a certain domain, it's from what I hear, like senior hire recruiting is super hard, especially when, as you said, you're geographically limited. So I think that should be built. I would use that, when I get to a company that's hiring for senior folks.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be just senior people, but yeah, that is that's obviously a problem because those are much harder to find.
Do you think that in San Francisco, remote culture is going to become more common? Not just pushed by founders, but pushed by VCs. VCs have always kind of been like, oh, have in-person teams because of culture, because I can check in on you to see what you all are doing. Yeah. But because of the high rent everywhere in San Francisco, do you think that's going to change on the VC side?
Yeah, I think so. And kind of a observation. So I'm not a Teal Fellow myself, but I kind of, know about the program and know a lot of people in the program. And the trend that kind of I've been observing is that, the older Teal folks, Teal Fellows have, stayed in San Francisco or have even moved to be in San Francisco, to be in this like vibrant community of founders. And, this last batch of like Teal Fellows chose not to do that. They chose not to move to San Francisco. And I'm seeing also YC companies, once they get their funding, they choose to move elsewhere and to not stay here. And part of the reason is cost and, a huge competition for engineers. And, then once you have such huge competition for engineers, then the loyalty of that engineer is, questionable, because you have these, patterns of people switching jobs every 18 months or so, because there's just so much excitement and so much shiny, like the shiny syndrome, that people move. And so, if you move away from here, you might have access to, talent that will stick around for longer because they don't have incentives to leave as much as, they do here. And your money is going to go a lot further. The engineer in San Francisco is a lot more expensive than practically anywhere else. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as someone who contemplated moving to San Francisco in the last couple of months, but didn't, just because of rent prices and a cost of apartment, I understand that. I do think there is a value in being in San Francisco 100%, but it's just, what is the cost attributed to that value, or kind of tied to that value? So my last one of my last questions for you is, you are a younger founder, like not 40, 50 senior, kind of like me, and you've had some success, and you with your career, and I'm kind of interested to hear, what advice would you have for anyone that's, coming out of college or in their mid-20s or early 30s, to have a super, set themselves up for success in their career. Yeah, kind of what advice would you have for people that are on the earlier side that want to have awesome careers?
Oh man. So I kind of chose a very careful career path up until this point, up until the starting my company point. So I went to, Microsoft, which is a much bigger, much more established, older company. And it was a very safe choice. And what I realized, like there are, friends kind of in my circle who I think are way more successful than I am. And they took a much more different path. They took the more riskier path of, joining a startup or, starting their own company or joining a YC company or even starting a YC company. And so, and obviously you hear a bunch of failure stories. So that path is, is more riskier. But what I realized is that if you have the chance and, if you're young, then you should go for quote unquote asymmetrical opportunities. So asymmetrical opportunities is basically where, you have a chance of getting a reward that's disproportional to the work you put in. So for example, you can work like 8 hours a day or like 10 hours a day really hard at your job and you're going to get, a normal salary. And let's say, you work, 10 hours at a startup, but it becomes successful, then the reward is like much like, disproportionate if it goes well. Now, oftentimes it doesn't happen, but when you're young, that's basically the only time in your life that you get to kind of experiment. And the other part is, the other kind of like asymmetric opportunity, quote unquote, is the fact that you get to meet a lot more interesting people that will help you later on, even if you fail. So, like let's say you start a company, and it fails. In 2 years, you realize you didn't find the product market fit, et cetera. But let's say you went through YC and you met all these great investors or maybe great other founders who gave you advice along the way. And so now your network is just much more established. And so later on, like whatever career path you choose, you're going to have like a better foundation for it. So that's kind of my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's awesome. Your piece on just the network in general, whether you succeed, whether you fail, it's almost like a network hack by going this risky startup path. And it's not like there's that much to lose when you're right out of college.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, I fully agree with that. So my last question for you is kind of on the same lines of the last question, but kind of more broad in that you've seen what it's like in a big company. You now are taking a swing at starting your own startup, and you're off to a fast start. I'm kind of curious to hear. There are a lot of people that might be listening. They might be like 10 as a kid or 50 as an adult that's retired, that wants to do something exciting, that want to start a company, but they don't necessarily know the first step to get started or how to get in the game or how to get funded, how to get the idea or the product out there. What general advice would you have for someone that wants to get started but just doesn't necessarily know the first step to get in there?
Yeah. So 2 points. One, I want to make a quick note about age. So there's like misconception that companies are only started by young people. Statistically speaking, if you look, the more successful companies are actually started by older folks. So if you are past, the prime age of 25 or whatever it is, you actually have a better chance of creating a successful company. So age should never be a deterrent, and the other way around. Like obviously we have tons of examples of really young folks dropping out of college even and starting like really successful companies. So regardless of where you are in your life journey, the path is, is still open if you want to start your own company. Now, okay, let's say you decide to start a company. Now what? Like, let's say you want to get funding, you want to find some investors, what happens? So this is kind of like where the advantage of San Francisco really comes into play. So I used to live in other cities, Seattle, Boston, kind of the DC suburbia area. If I wanted to start a company there, I would not have any idea where to go. Like, just the investment scene is just really not there. And I didn't know a single person in the area who started their own company who I can ask questions to. And here it's a completely different story. Let's say I had zero idea about how to fundraise. I have so many friends who either work at small startups or who are founders themselves. And I could just go and say, look, I don't know it, first thing about it. Like, how did you find your first investor? And, and they would kind of walk me through their process. And, every journey is kind of unique. But you at least have, stepping stone of who to ask for you to get to that next stage. And, you might ask the first person, they say, oh, like, these are my investors. Do you want to go talk to them? And you go talk to them. And let's say, your relationship doesn't work out, or maybe they don't want to invest in your project, whatever it is. You can ask them for their recommendations, right? And then they give you, 3 other names, and you go talk to them. And then you have like this network effect of kind of like, gathering people who, maybe you're not going to work with, but at least now you know who to ask. And in San Francisco, like that process is way easier, right, than in any other city. And obviously, if you get into an accelerator program like YC, or there are many others, like Techstars, I think is another one. That's obviously like a much easier path as well, because the program will kind of guide you and make those connections for you. So, yeah.
All right. You all heard it here first. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and jamming from cryptocurrency to remote work to what you're working on with Beanstalk and beyond. So thank you so much for coming on and having a conversation with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.